Asks Robert, was the human being created? No, although it would be necessary to define what the human being is, because there are so many races that go from being very different to the same as the terrestrial ones. It falls into the very concept of eternity. Nobody considers the concept of creation of the human being, the Lyrian race, among the interstellar races, because there is no linear time to consider. The concept of creation, development, or that of evolution does not exist. There is adaptation to the linear or semi-linear environment of some humanoid or human species. But from the broadest point of view, they do not form the species, because there is no before and after from the total point of view of the overall set of all humanoid species or known humanomorphas. Asks Robert. Right. If the creation of both the Taygetans and the human Lyrians was due to the mechanics of the manifestation of something higher, like higher self, with some agreements of other higher selves, in other words, it appeared spontaneously in a precise place and time, could that be possible? Could it also be that the two species, Taygetan and Lyrian, were created like this at the same time? It wouldn't be something spontaneous. The differences in 5D of one species compared to another are due to a semi-linear adaptation to the environment. It is not evolutionism. It is only adaptation, and yes, genetic changes occur, but it is by imposition of the intention of their consciousness. Although here, yes, there is a before and after, it is only relative and specific to the species. Even so, it is difficult to define the time frame of said adaptation, since it means going back with a linear mentality to trace the origins. The Great Expansion is known, but exactly when it happened cannot be known. It is only calculated from the human frame of reference, which was roughly 1 million years ago. Asks Robert. We have always said that the higher a density is, the easier it is to be able to manifest something. And you always tell us that we are not this body. If in my dreams I can create various realities, including beings with new appearances, etc., could it be that beings from very high planes manifest these lower plane bodies that we have here on Earth, for example? I can argue that dreams are reality. The physical world is not. My answer is that yes, it makes sense what you say. However, the only thing I would add is that it is not necessarily with the intention of creating a human being purposefully. Just as our dreams seem so real and complete while we are sleeping, so would our existence here in 5D for them, all being a dream of these beings, some kind of instant manifestation and game maybe. In fact, I think it is. Just that these beings beyond are ourselves, I think. Simply by the fact that they are and exist as beings of light, and have the practical intention, for whatever reason, to manifest themselves as entities separated from another entity with humanoid morphology, that is, with limbs, torso, and head, is enough to cause a chain reaction through the densities where they manifest beings of a more material nature to the point of reaching the terrestrial human being. Yes, it is us. We return to being them when we sleep. And if we dream things called mundane, it is because that is what is occupying our attention. Asks Robert, what about the reptilian brain, humans? It is a completely human interpretation, because by isolating that part of the brain, they see that it works in a similar or comparative way to how a reptile would react, according to them. But there is no evidence or nothing to prove that that part of the brain is due to reptilian genes. It just seems to be reptilian, therefore they say it is reptile. There is no genetic link. It is said that the human being was created by combining 21 extraterrestrial species, including the reptile. I contradict it. Every human being is genetically different. I mean that there can be a body, not the species, a body or a series of bodies of a specific group that is artificially adapted to serve as a vehicle for a reptilian soul. But it is a concept or a procedure of frequencies, not of something physical, and it does not apply to the entire species. But it is not just a case of reptiles. It happens with all other races as well. Adaptations within the human being. Insectoid races, mantis, for example, or races not found on Earth, such as Arcturian branches. For this reason, from the point of view of the Taygetan genetic science and that of the Federation, the terrestrial human being is not considered a species. We catalog the species in this other way as well. First, primary species, which are those that are holographic fragments of the whole, of the unified self, which are those that have manifested from higher planes. 2. Secondary species, which are those that have been created, altered by some of the primary species with a specific purpose, using the imposition of a higher intention with the goal to alter the DNA of those who will use the final container body. A species that would be primary is one that has not been altered by anyone else, which, according to everyone's records, has always been, or is lost in the mist of time. It is taken as the creation of the source, or the original unified self. The humans would fall within the second classification. Asks Robert. You mean manipulated by mind control and adapted so that starseeds from other races can enter, yes? Yeah. Only one thing. It is not necessary to do the physical adaptation with artificial means due to the nature of the same density. In the case of humans, yes, because it is 3D and the manifestation is slow. It takes a very drastic and rapid change so that a starseed can enter. From 5D, no, it is faster, and the mere intention of the new being information inside the uterus already modifies the DNA of the container in a satisfactory way. Yes, it happens that an artificial intervention is necessary. Yes, it happens in 5D too. But it is not a norm, as in 3D. It is a rare exception. My question is, if you said that an adaptation has been made or could be made so that the body can be the vehicle for a reptile soul, for example, has this been done on Earth in general by other races? Have other races made these adaptations, aside from the starseed mothers? Yes, and it is a constant. Virtually all races have. Sometimes it is not necessary to adapt anything. With the changes with pure manifestation, they are enough. Other times, yes, necessary. An example of this are many autistic children. Their soul or their consciousness takes longer to fully enter their human body, since the being, soul or Atma, comes from high densities, and entering all at once could bring neurological problems. But do they take a group of humans at random to adapt their souls? Or, for example, the Syrians go for the Chinese, Andromedans for the Congo, etc.? How do they choose? No, not like this, asks Robert. That is to say, races do not have preferences for specific races of the Earth? The starseeds of any specific race tend to spread across all races almost evenly. They don't take just one race. For example, the Taygetan race, that at home is almost 100% or totally Nordic. On Earth, there will be Taygetan starseeds in all human races. So with other ET starseeds. You said that humans are the secondary race. Again, to summarize, we are the secondary, but not because of the genetic changes that races have made, because DNA will always return to a natural pattern, but because of genetic changes made due to impositions of mind control matrix, right? Yes, Gosha, exactly that. In the end, the humans, yes, have experienced genetic changes that limit them. But those changes come from the intention of humans themselves and are reversible. They do not come from a deterministic genetic laboratory. The interpretation of the Sumerian tablets, where it has been said that the human was created by them, is a human interpretation, because it is the only way they know how DNA is altered. It is a reflection of human thinking, of their limited understanding with limited data. The true genetic alterations applied to humans have been done through mind control, from the application of beliefs and the manipulation of what is possible and what is not, by imposing a structure of values and ideas artificially placed with a goal to cause genetic changes. This is how the genes of a species are altered by part of a star race, positive or negative, and not in the laboratory. What happens is that humans cannot understand this because they have been programmed precisely about this point, so that they do not understand the transcendence of consciousness and mind. There is no matter. Everything is an idea. All the star race genes are already within each and every one of the humans. They are only deactivated. They are neither altered nor removed. It is the very consciousness intention of the being that inhabits each body that will determine which genes will be activated and which will be ignored. But there they are, waiting for the signal from their owner. Okay, I understand. Great, thank you. And another thing here. If the genetic changes that the ETs have made sporadically, as for example to accommodate the terrestrial vehicle for a certain ET soul, like a mother, these changes later return to their original pattern, yes? Because you said they always go back to their original pattern. In this case, it would be a Lyrian pattern, yes? Yes, Gosha, it is true, yes. The mother returns, for example, to her original pattern. How long? It depends on the circumstances. But in general, the maximum would be 7 years, which is the total regeneration period of the human body. Note, changes can last for days or hours. Others can last a few generations, but they always return to the pattern imposed by the person's consciousness. I insist. That is why the perception of the person must be changed, so that the changes are permanent. Asks Robert. I have the following question. Everything we have talked about genetics, what other species it could be applied to here on Earth, apart from a human one? I mean, what other species have a great connection to Source? I can assure you that all the remaining species, and each one of them, have a greater connection with Source than humans. Among those that stand out most obviously could be cetaceans, dolphins, and whales. It's just that, Robert, the other animal species are doing what they do best and are experiencing what they were designed to experience. The humans not so much. There isn't much mind control applied to cats. Cats know how to be, well, cats very well. They know how to be at peace, in their center, in their self, enjoy their peace and well-being in the sun. Not the humans. They are far from what they come into the world to be. That is why they are so unhappy, because that feeling is trying to tell them that their path is wrong, to go seek their center, their path in life. But they are programmed to ignore that, to serve society. Their value as humans is for what they can do for society, not for what they can do for themselves. But even with that mind control at work, their souls do tell them that something is very wrong. The cats, why then do they get sick and get old? How many years do cats live in Taygeta to compare? I require more time to explain the animals topic. but it is part or collateral damage due to the matrix itself, which has as its main component linear time as a metronome that synchronizes everything, creating a linearity of before, present, and after, which produces in the animals themselves that process, among other things like low frequencies and toxins, 3D, all together working against them. Asks Robert, I have this question from a follower, a little note on the genetic issue. And if in the very construction of the 3D human avatar, the DNA is already structured in such a way that it works with a series of characteristics, what are those that mainly determine its character and personality, and at the same time can be modified or altered? Genetics is the result of perception, and that is the result of character and personality. The personality is given by or as a result of experiences that one had in life and in other past lives. Genetics will never determine the person or their consciousness. Genetics is just a reflection of consciousness. The question is written from the deterministic human perception, causal or victim mentality. Asks Robert, why do humans have 23 chromosomes compared to 24 that apes or Taygetans have? There are two answers to that. What we see more likely is that one has been suppressed, which is still latent, by the same method of consciousness manipulating its own genes. What happens is that if a certain quality or characteristic in a being is not used for a prolonged period of time, it will begin to atrophy, to the point that it finally manifests as a change in the very genes that control or are associated with that quality. The second option, which is not ruled out, is that the change has been artificially imposed and the gene has not returned to normal because people are under mental control and a low frequency that is designed to suppress that particular gene, with the objective of not wanting that the humans return to their full potential. When making a genetic change in the laboratory, so that as a species it does not return to its original configuration, the stimulus of consciousness focused or linked to the gene that has been removed must be suppressed. Even so, it is temporary. The genetic recovery process is postponed. I am talking about entire generations in this case. The 24 chromosomes are the normal basis of advanced carbon-based animals. The fact that the human has only 22 or 23 is a clear indication of manipulation, either completely as a consequence of mind control or by direct manipulation with subsequent mental suppression as a stabilizer of the change. Thank you. I have this question. You say that aging is largely the result of mind control. Native tribes that did not have mind control also have elders, old people. How do they get old? As long as they have the perception of linear time, they will grow old. As long as they have a past, a present, and a future in mind. Because matter, or what is called matter, is linked to a frequency. And as the same word frequency describes, it is connected to a period of time. It must be controlled over time so as not to age. And they are inside the 3D matrix, as animals also age. Yet the elders of those tribes do not age in the same way as very matrix people. They maintain their vitality well into their 80s or 90s. It depends on your consciousness. Asks Robert. Okay, I have questions regarding genetics from followers. The first one. If genetics is manifested by consciousness, then what factors influence someone to be born with Down syndrome, or dwarfism, or albino, or having the left eye of one color and the right of another color? On one occasion, my cat had a 3-legged puppy, but she ran faster than the others. Surely many are wondering the same thing. Everything in the universe is frequencies. Even Tesla said so. So all these genetic changes and accidents are due to the interaction in a frequency soup. It is an alteration of a person, as it would be if he or she lost a hand. It is not genetic. It is intervention in the case of defects. Something has invasively altered the DNA, but it is not a new species or a mutation in itself, only at the individual level. In the case of secondary factors such as eye, hair, or skin color, it is also due to the compatibility of a frequency. That is to say, from the point of view of that individual, he has done or thought things that have led him to manifest those individual changes. One thing is a disastrous mutation in an individual, and another is for an individual to have secondary attributes that only define their individuality. The fact that an individual was born defective is due to DNA damage, but it is damage. Damage can occur at any level, whether by accident, by dropping a piano on yourself, or by being exposed to ionizing radiation that has damaged your DNA. Asks Robert. Thank you. Another question. Suppose a human gets past the Van Allen bands. Do 12 strands, 24 chromosomes get activated? What symptoms would they have? First, you will marvel to see everything there is, being far from the matrix frequencies that artificially lower you. You will gradually realize that you always had telepathy. You will be in a feeling of total happiness, and you will only want to know more and more about everything around you in 5D. This produces a very strong and rapid opening of consciousness, and this in turn activates your entire DNA. It is not that it mutates, it is already there in your DNA, just that what you always had is activated. DNA looks like a ladder with 2 helixes on the sides supporting the rungs. 2 steps, 1 on each side, 2 propellers. But in 5D, the real structure of those 2 steps comes to light or is visible, and those steps in turn have 6 strands on each side, a total of 12. They still look like 2 helixes, but each one is made up of 6 intertwined like hair braids. These strands are braided, but when producing its shadow from 5D to 3D, the shadow will be seen as a single object, therefore only 2 strands. If you have a braided steel cable, for example, cable made of many minor ones, like the one used in a bridge, and you observe its shadow, it will look like a single object or solid and not composite rope. That is what happens with DNA in 3D and 5D. While in 3D, you can only work with 2 strands, although there is much more information in them. In 5D, you perceive them, because as we have already said, there is more detail as we increase in density. Already in 5D, you can have access to the rest of the information that in its shadow 3D was not possible to access. Comments Robert. Thank you, Swaruu. This information resonates with me. This shows me that the astronauts never crossed the Van Allen bands because they never explained an experience like this. You can't, asks Robert. Swaruu, have you ever seen a human go from 3D to 5D? Yeah, Suriko, asks Robert. Do they have any desire later to return to 3D? Oh no, they don't want to go back, comments Robert. Well, that confirms me more than the Van Allen bands were not crossed. It would be like a drug for the body, I imagine. It can only be done with a ship with a certain specific kind of technology, which they will never admit to have, or the human population will also want it, for purposes that do not suit the Cabal. Like a drug, Robert? Comments Robert. I imagine that the body would enter a state of happiness and harmony so great that it would not feel like going back to 3D, and perhaps they would rather die inside the ship than return to the 3D matrix. Yeah. Because what you perceive is a lot of freedom, and you have freed yourself from your fears and your problems, even if you develop 5D problems afterwards. When it is said that races contributed their DNA to human DNA, or that we carry DNA from many races inside, what is meant by that? That leads to what I wanted to share with you anyway. Another blow to the official genetics ufology. Carbon-based genetics, that of humans and that of 5D, which is the largest in quantity because above 5D everything is more energetic, is characterized by being apparently or mostly the same. Because, speaking of existential planes, we, all 5D beings and species, are very close in relation to the original source. This means that we will all have DNA mostly in common, because we are all made in the same way. Earth science knows and has shown that, genetically speaking, a monkey has 99% of genes identical to humans, on which they base themselves to argue that the human comes from the monkey, which is not the case. From the Andromedans, the Eslientiplex, Urmas, Alpha Draconians, Sirians, Engan, Malakak, Ummo, Mantis, Seded Ceres Avian, Lurkers, Maitre, Kingu, Solations, whoever they are, they will have 99% the same genes as the others. These follow a necessary pattern in common with all carbon and DNA-based biological life. Animals will also have more than 95% gene compatibility with humans. A cave fungus will have more than 90% of genes than a human being, proved by Earth science. So, to say that human genes were found in this or that skull of Homo capensis or skull of Star Child, Lloyd Pye, is something to be expected, and that indicates the level of ignorance of Earth science in the matter of genes that they would call extraterrestrial. So, the human being made using the genes of 21 extraterrestrial species, that is false. And I remember well that those who said this were no other than the Andromedans, and they have given it as information to Alex Collier. In which direction do you want me to clarify? Why did they tell him this, if it is false? Comments Robert. Yes, Corey Good said that too. Because just because they are stellar doesn't mean they are geneticists. I do not know why, but I mention it because I am aware of where that idea came from. Such a thing is simply not possible, because life with the human or humanoid model is the most common in the universe, as we have already mentioned. None of those humanomorphic races were created. The concept is wrong and is part of the minimization of the concepts on the part of humans for not being able to understand things above their capacity or level of understanding. But Andromedans saying this, how can they be wrong in this way? That is why afterwards people end up being confused and do not know who to believe. It is difficult for humans to discern. I feel bad for them. Andromedans tend to be quite backward in various areas compared to Taygeta, as much as it hurts them to admit. Another example of this is their concept of karma, which we see as wrong. And if they did know that about humans, it could be their agenda. This is possible, given the conflict they have between the inhabitants of their own biosphere ships. This also has to be made clear in some video, that this is also why so many different versions of ET contact information come out. Not because the contacts are false, but because each contacted person is speaking with another race and their angle of how they see things. Yes, it is not that the contactees invent or are false. Just because the ETs are stellar races does not mean that they tell the whole truth or have the whole truth. Because, as everywhere, you are in the evolutionary process of consciousness. In other words, you are still learning, and sometimes things are given according to the best data or the best possible calculations. Still though, they can get some things wrong. But for other things, there may be very strong and firm data that is difficult to change, as is the case with what I'm explaining here today. They cannot claim that the Earth human was made with genes from 21 different ET races, if there are more humans, heaps of them, all over the quadrant, and those races are 99% the same as human. Also note that many things like skin color, sex, and size, among many other characteristics, are not controlled by one gene, much less by a group of genes, but are controlled by markers within those genes. This means that although human science views a monkey 99% same as a human, the markers within the genes are very different as a whole, resulting in a totally different species. This happens, or is the same thing that happens with the star races, or between the star races. Here, we must also define what exactly a different gene is from the point of view of human genetic science. They see it as something with a radical change in its morphology or its chemistry that differs from the norm. But terrestrial norms do not apply to those outside the Earth. So, as an example, a domestic cat has the same genes 99.99999% as a lion or a Bengal tiger. It is the same species. A cat is a cat. It is the markers that give them the sizes, colors, and proportions. Goes for the Urma too. I have another question. It's about the alleged hybridizations, chimeras. The question is, if genes cannot be altered because they return to the original state, how is it possible to make mixtures of breeds and hybrids, dogs, etc., and other types of mixes? They also say that there are ET human hybrids too. Or is this another topic? To start and finish fast, they don't last long. Individuals die early and rarely reproduce. Yes, it is the same topic. Yes, they exist. This is done especially at the Dulce, Nuevo Mexico, New Mexico dump bases and at the Cardel, Veracruz, Mexico base as the most notorious ones. But it is also done in other places, such as Plum Island in the USA. The only way to make these changes permanent, I put the quote because I do not think that will be achieved, is by keeping the subject in a very low existential frequency, which is achieved with suffering, terror, and constant fear. His very deformed monster condition helps a lot to maintain that perception, and with the use of advanced mind control. Asks Robert. But it could also be done in reverse, keeping the subjects at a high frequency. Yes, but in the case of a monster, it will be difficult to keep it at true high frequency. It will have the strong tendency to disappear from there, not be the monster, return to the original source. But there is another variant, the soulless, biological robots. Okay, but how did they manage to create a dog then? Why did its genetics remain? It should go back to the wolf. A dog also was created, but using filtration, or which individuals to choose to cross to get the desired results. Yet note that as a species, if released, it will return to primordial dog or base animal, the street dog. But they have not had mind control done on them. Why not return to this state now, if genetics always goes back? As a breed, they don't find it bothersome to be a basset hound or a Doberman. The changes are in the markers that are the first to change. And leaving them alone, they will return to what they have always been. It is genetic interference, like what would happen when there is a horrible defect in a person or animal as well, due to chemical, radiological, or physical environmental causes. But that's what I mean. Why don't dogs become wolves again, or more wild? In the case of dogs, they need a few generations, like or from 2, to return to the original. Yes, they quickly return to the wolf or coyote mentality. Dogs, as you know them, some breeds, are a decade old. Others are 50 years old. Others up to 200 years maybe, but with continuous human manipulation to maintain the purity of the breed. A dog from the year 1800 differs greatly from a current one. They are now kept as a variant of a race, as wolves are wolves and coyotes are coyotes. They are all canines. It is their base genetics. Don't expect a Chihuahua to eventually turn into a Siberian wolf. Why not, Swaruu? In theory, shouldn't it? Its genetics should revert back. Because they are not the same expression of the canine soul. Because the wolf is not the base of all dog breeds, only some. If you take, on the other hand, a German Shepherd or a Husky, it is possible that they turn wolves a few generations later. Some breeds do have wolf in them, and if the traits turn out to be dominant over the others, yes, wolves could emerge from there a few generations later. The wolf is not the base of the dog. The dog is a mixture of canines, including wolf in some cases. It depends on which genes are dominant. It might come out as a coyote, dingo, fox, or wolf. And the ones that control those genes to be dominant or not are the consciousnesses of the dogs themselves. But they are not under any mind control. They are under human control. And the constant manipulation of forced crossbreeds by dog breeders. And the low 3D density that affects them also slows down the changes towards the originals. And hybrid ET humans exist, Swaruu? You too are that. And there are several grades of them and attributes. All the starseeds are extraterrestrial hybrids, just that the changes are mostly mental, cerebral, not so much physical, although that also occurs. And yes, you too are hybrids. Okay, but not because of genetic interference. We are because of our consciousness. That is genetic interference. But I mean, my Earth mother has not mixed with the Taygeta, for example. That's what I mean. No, you impose that on your body, but in a mental way. However, having said that, starseed children tend to prefer to be born to starseed mothers and fathers, because they will understand them more. But that is not genetics. That is preferences for conscientious and cultural outcomes. That occurs mostly in recent, second, or better still, third generation starseeds, post-2001. Every case is different. But as time passes on Earth, it becomes exponentially more and more likely that a baby will turn out to be a starseed. And strictly speaking, all humans are and have always been starseeds. You are not genetically limited. Get that out of your heads. A bad excuse for not growing and doing nothing.